It was supposed to be the best-kept secret on the planet. Codename, the Manhattan Project. Its success would assure the United States dominance over its new rival.
The Soviets clearly had ambitions, global ambitions.
Yet from the start, it became the target of the greatest industrial spy operation of the 20th century.
The Soviets put in place espionage networks that were unimaginable to the United States.
No secret was safe. No one could be trusted.
They were willing to die for their cause, which they did.
Here is the declassified story of the atomic spies who set the world on edge. Arlington Hall, the home of the future National Security Agency. After the end of World War II, these men and women have a special mission: to decipher the coded messages sent by one of their wartime allies, the Soviet Union.
Of course, the United States and the Soviet Union are allies, but there's a great deal of mistrust on both sides. The United States government knew that the Soviet Union was spying on the United States. The FBI had begun several investigations during World War II of Soviet espionage in America. So the relationship was, on the surface friendly, but there was a very strong layer of suspicion right below it.
The task is enormous. Agents intercept thousands of undecipherable telegrams that pass between Moscow and the Soviet embassies or consulates on American soil. But in 1946, thanks to a new, brilliant cryptanalyst named Meredith Gardner, the team manages to crack a crucial message that dates back to December 2nd, 1944. The text cites 24 names, names that no one would imagine appearing in Soviet documents.
What was significant about this list of names is they were probably the most secret names in the world at that time, because all the names were nuclear physicists who were engaged in the Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Project, supposedly the United States' best-kept secret, the program to build the first nuclear bomb. In Arlington Hall, the discovery hits the team like a shockwave. How could the Russians have known about this top-secret program 8 months before the US dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima? After decrypting this telegram, American counterintelligence services launch a large-scale investigation to discover how deeply the Manhattan Project has been compromised. And most of all, to flush out the moles who did it. May 8th, 1945, the end of the Second World War left Europe exhausted and traumatized after 6 years of conflict. In July 1945, representatives of the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union meet in Potsdam to decide the fate of the defeated nations. Churchill Truman and Stalin appear to stand together to rebuild Europe. But behind closed doors, the seeds of discord have already begun to sprout.
In global strategic terms, the principal concern about the Soviet Union was that the Soviets clearly had ambitions not only to extend their sphere of influence from Central and Eastern Europe, but they had global ambitions.
At an impasse, they divide the world into two parts: the Soviet bloc, controlled by the USSR, and the Western bloc, led by the United States. Between them, an impossible Iron Curtain.
I think the Potsdam Conference was the first major manifestation of the Cold War.
In this delicate and contentious new arrangement, the Americans, for the moment, are one step ahead. Just a few years earlier, in 1938, the world learned that a German physicist had discovered nuclear fission and its tremendous potential for producing an ultra-powerful bomb. Several countries launched atomic bomb research programs, but none approached the scale of the American one. Codename, the Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Project is the project where the goal is not to do research on can you make an atomic bomb, how would you do it? No, the goal is to make atomic bombs. And that requires hundreds of thousands of people, billions of dollars, creating essentially an entirely new industry from scratch.
More than 30 sites across the USA and Canada join this colossal endeavor. Among them, Oak Ridge on the banks of the Tennessee River, dedicated to obtaining uranium-235. Hanford, Washington State, assigned to produce plutonium-239. Developing and building the sensitive bomb mechanism happens in a once sleepy town called Los Alamos.
It was very isolated. But once the government came and decided this is where they wanted to have their top secret scientific research laboratory, it did not appear on any maps. Suddenly it was not allowed to speak the word Los Alamos. It didn't exist. There were military police on horseback who would patrol the perimeter. There were many restrictions. At this time, and perhaps for all time, it was the greatest secret in America.
In this high-security boomtown, dozens of Western scientists gather. They're prohibited from discussing their work. Phones are tapped, mail intercepted, and conversations monitored.
We were immediately told that our mail was being sponsored in both directions, and I knew that I wrote letters to home. I had to leave them unsealed so that they could be read before they went out of Los Alamos. The mail coming back was also unsealed and then resealed by the censor.
We never used the word bomb. We didn't use the word atomic. We didn't use the word uranium, plutonium. We had secret code names for all of those things. And so the bomb was called the gadget.
The laboratories are divided into divisions, each dedicated to a specific job. Conducting this immense orchestra were two men, Leslie Groves, the Manhattan Project's military director, and Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director. They lead a challenging mission, not just to develop an atomic bomb, but rather two bombs, one with uranium and the other with plutonium. The Soviets have a different kind of nuclear program. They don't invest heavily in research, but they excel at espionage. Germany, France, the UK, Canada, India, Argentina. During the Second World War, the USSR set up the largest spy network in the world, men and women on the payroll of the NKVD, the precursor to the KGB, infiltrate the highest posts in Western countries.
The communist ideology, the socialist ideology, had a particular attractiveness to a wide number of people in the United States. And the Soviet intelligence service was very adept at exploiting that and finding people that then subsequently were in mid-level and senior positions in government and in the various elements of the American war industry during the war.
The ideological recruitment of Americans is an interesting phenomenon. Of course, you had the Great Depression. There were many reasons. People that were disaffected after World War I, and Western society in and of itself had bred people who saw society and capitalism as having failed, and Moscow as offering another answer, and maybe a better answer. That was the fertile ground with which the Soviets operated.
There was a belief, a false belief as we now know, that the Soviet Union was a workers' paradise.
They believe that the United States is this imperial power that wants to take over the world. So for them, putting the United States in check, that might lead to a better world.
The American nuclear program isn't immune to espionage. Spies infiltrate every research site, including Los Alamos. Despite the drastic security measures, the best-kept secret in the United States is no secret at all. This is Klaus Fuchs. The tennis ball is a secret signal. Born in Germany, son of an anti-Nazi communist pastor, he fled at the beginning of the war and pursued an education in physics in England.
While he's in the UK, he ends up meeting people who are involved with the Russian Army Intelligence, the GRU. And they basically, over some time, get him to agree to give them copies of his work. And some of this is again, even before he's involved in the atomic bomb work. It's kind of a coincidence that he gets pulled in on that. Once he gets pulled in on that, they get very excited by this. He continues to work on it. He is very good at his job. He's one of the most brilliant people working on the project.
In 1943, a group of British scientists comes to the United States to participate in the Manhattan Project, and Klaus Fuchs is among them. The Americans are not the only ones to benefit from his research.
He comes to Great Britain. Great Britain hosts him, gives him shelter from the Nazis, effectively. What does he do? He starts spying on the British. Then he takes that espionage activity and moves it to North America and starts spying on the Americans.
The spies during the war are not always seeing it as the United States versus the Soviet Union. I mean, the United States and the Soviet Union are allies. Fuchs is seeing it more like Fuchs is helping fight the Nazis on two fronts.
In February 1944, the man with the green book meeting Fuchs is a Soviet agent named Harry Gold.
Harry Gold is a Swiss-born chemist, and he has been engaged in industrial espionage for a long period of time for the Soviets. stealing processes, stealing intellectual property, systems, chemical processes. Harry Gold's sole function in relation to Klaus Fuchs is to act as a courier, an intermediary, a go-between. Klaus Fuchs is supplying information that is collected by Harry Gold. He doesn't know Harry Gold's true identity. Harry Gold then passes it on to a recipient who passes it on to the NKVD. So it's a cutout, if you like.
Between February and June 1944, Klaus Fuchs drafts dozens of notes about his work, top secret information directly related to the bomb design, which he shares with Harry Gold. The original documents provided by the young physicist are still classified as top secret. But his spy work is confirmed by this Soviet telegram dated July 25, 1944. It appears under its code name, Rest.
Almost half a year of contact with Rest has demonstrated the value of his work for us. We consider it necessary to pay him for this half year the due reward of $500. He fully deserves this sum.
The Soviet intelligence agency does not hide its interest in Fuchs. Then suddenly, during the summer of '44, their recruit receives an unexpected promotion. Fuchs leaves New York to join the theoretical division at the Los Alamos Research Center.
He's not some small character. He's put in charge of some of the hardest problems relating to the implosion weapon, so the crushing of the plutonium, because he's very, very good at these kinds of things. He's also put on problems relating to how to calculate how explosive your bomb is. I mean, some of the original calculations and papers that are foundational to making the atomic bomb have his name as an author, so he's not minor in any way.
Klaus Fuchs occupies a strategic spot in Los Alamos research, and he is one of the few scientists to benefit from a global perspective of the project.
Most people on the Manhattan Project knew almost nothing about what was going on. And there was sort of one exception to that, and that is the colloquium series at Los Alamos. These were meetings that would be held by people who had the highest security. They would have many of these meetings, and Fuchs was allowed to go to all of them. With these meetings, he knows about huge amounts of work going on, problems they're having in parts of the bomb that he's not involved with. These help him a lot in sort of getting a big picture. You really can't imagine, if what you're trying to learn is how to make an atomic bomb, there's really no better spy that you would ever get than Klaus Fuchs. He knew everything. He practically had a photographic memory. He was involved with everything, and nobody suspected him.
The spy, Klaus Fuchs, is invaluable to the USSR intelligence services. But in Los Alamos, he's not the only one keeping secrets.
Darling, I have been reading a lot of books on the Soviet Union. Dear, I can see how farsighted and intelligent those leaders are. I've come to a stronger belief in the principles of socialism and communism.
These words were written by 22 years old David Greenglass in a letter sent to his wife in June 1944. He's a mechanical engineer and is preparing to join the engineering department at the Los Alamos labs. A longtime communist sympathizer, he is recruited as a spy by members of his own family.
David Greenglass had a sister. She was married to a man named Julius Rosenberg.
Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. The couple has been a part of the New York network of Soviet agents for a long time. One of their missions is to recruit new spies. So when they find out that David is joining the Manhattan Project, they deem him an ideal candidate. In the autumn of '44, when David Greenglass is already in Los Alamos, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg invite his wife to dinner. Their goal, to persuade her to convince her husband to collaborate with the enemy. Several weeks later, this telegram is sent to Moscow. Enclosed is David Greenglass's decision. It appears under the codename Caliber, and his wife is renamed Osa.
Osa has returned from a trip to see Caliber. Caliber expressed his readiness to help in throwing light on the work being carried on at Camp 2.
Camp 2. It's the Soviet codename for Los Alamos. On December 16, 1944, Greenglass becomes an undercover spy in the thick of the Manhattan Project. He doesn't have the same expertise as Klaus Fuchs and has less access to technical information.
Caliber has arrived in Tyre on leave. He has given us a handwritten plan of the layout of Camp 2 and facts known to him about the work and the personnel. The basic task of the camp is to make the mechanism which is to serve as the detonator.
This NKVD telegram gives a glimpse of what the young spy was sending. A map of Los Alamos, but also details about the work in progress. The classified information begins to flow. Out of sight, Klaus Fuchs and David Greenglass draft detailed reports on their work, filling pages and pages with mathematical formulas, copying the plans of various bomb parts, and smuggling out these ultra-sensitive documents. On June 2, 1945, Klaus Fuchs meets in Santa Fe with Harry Gold, his liaison officer. On this day, he provides one of the most crucial documents, a detailed plan of the plutonium bomb, including its dimensions. It also reveals that the first U.S. tests are scheduled for as early as July. The following day, Harry Gold rings at a door in Albuquerque, not far from Santa Fe. He has a meeting with David Greenglass while visiting his wife nearby. The documents provided by Greenglass confirm that Fuchs is one of the main suppliers of top-secret information to the Soviets.
There is no doubt that the information that the Soviets received from Klaus Fuchs and David Greenglass was absolutely essential to avoid all the rabbit holes, all the dead ends, all the red herrings. They'd saved thousands of hours and millions of dollars not having to pursue the full research program. So they had all the benefit of the spies within the Manhattan Project.
The question is, why do people spy, and why do they take the decision to spy, and what does that mean for them? If somebody decides to betray their country, of course, that's a significant event. People that decide to do these things, many cases, they have significant egos. Either they believe themselves above risk, or they have some special role in the world, and this is going to be a chance to make their mark.
As details of the American project gradually pass into the hands of the NKVD in July of 1945, 250 scientists and technicians find themselves in the middle of the desert, organizing the very first atomic bomb tests. On July 16, 1945, at 5:30 in the morning, a powerful explosion, equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT, resounds. The atomic mushroom is visible within a radius of 300 kilometers. Shortly after, the United States sends Japan an ultimatum to surrender. But on July 28th, the Japanese government rejects the proposition. On August 6, 1945, the atomic bomb Little Boy strikes Hiroshima. 70,000 people are killed instantly. Just as many are injured. 3 days later, the US launches a second bomb, Fat Man, on Nagasaki. This time, 40,000 deaths. With its back against the wall, Japan surrenders on September 2nd, 1945. For now, the United States has sole possession of this new and inconceivably powerful weapon. It assures the Americans of their dominance. But what they are about to discover will shake everything they know. In 1946, just a few months after the war, the men and women of Arlington Hall worked tirelessly to try to crack the Russian telegrams. The Russian secret services use a highly effective encryption method, the one-time pad. First, it's a question of converting the letters of the message into a series of numbers based on a straddling checkerboard memorized by the agent. The numbers are then gathered into groups of 5. Then, a one-time pad containing random numbers is added. Only the sender and the receiver of the message have these matching pads. The numbers of the same column are added 2 by 2. Then the 10th digits are erased. Here's the message as sent. To decode it, the recipient will use the same straddling checkerboard, and most importantly, the same one-time pad to reverse the operation.
Even the most powerful supercomputer in the world cannot break a one-time pad message if it's done correctly with the 5 important steps. A random number. Only 2 copies, one with the sender, one with the receiver. Destroyed immediately after it's used. The user adds, the receiver subtracts. And the 5th, the length of the key needs to be equal at least to the length of the message. And with those 5 conditions in place, you have an unbreakable message.
For months, the cryptanalysts at Arlington Hall struggle with these impressive disposable pads. But in early 1946, a new recruit joins the Russian project team. His name, Meredith Gardner. This brilliant linguist manages to unearth the elusive flaw. Duplicates in the single-use code sheets. Extremely small series of perfectly identical numbers found in several telegrams.
Once the Soviet Union was in World War II, the intelligence traffic ramped up enormously. They're sending enormous numbers of messages, and thus using enormous numbers of one-time pads. This is the pre-computer age. Today, if you want to generate random numbers, a computer can do it, and it can generate random numbers from now until the end of time. It was a lot harder and a lot more time-consuming to generate random numbers during World War II, and they couldn't manufacture enough. So they decided, let's use some of the one-time pads twice. How likely is it that anybody will ever find out? So they began to reproduce one-time pad pages and slip them into new one-time pads.
Exploiting these minuscule repetitions, Gardner cracks the Soviet intelligence exchanges and learns that the top-secret Manhattan Project has been compromised down to the names of project scientists.
Now, the interesting point is that the scientists who had been employed in the Manhattan Project worked there at Los Alamos under alias. So although some of them were very well-known Nobel Prize winners, even they operated under alias.
American intelligence people are stunned. Here's a Russian cable naming the American scientists that are working on the atomic bomb, names that were not publicly known. So this was really the first major realization on the part of American intelligence that the Soviet espionage had penetrated the atomic bomb project.
The cryptanalysts at Arlington Hall work relentlessly to flush out the Soviet spies. But decoding new telegrams takes time. Meanwhile, in the USSR, the nuclear research program has grown in total secrecy. Starting in 1945, the ranks swell to nearly 600,000 employees and scientists. And on August 29th, 1949, in Kazakhstan, the Soviet Union orders its first nuclear test. The USSR becomes the second country with the atomic bomb.
The atomic bomb that the Soviets detonated in August 1949 was probably an exact replica of the Fat Man bomb that the United States dropped on Nagasaki. From everything we know, the Soviets did not deviate from the plans that they received courtesy of espionage of the American and British work at Los Alamos. The information gave the Soviets a clear leg up.
Realizing the extent of the security breach, the Americans ramp up their efforts to decipher Soviet telegrams, renaming it the Venona Project. Gradually, they decode more messages, plunging the American intelligence services into absolute and utter horror. The original documents are still top secret, stashed in the secure archives of the NSA. But in recent years, copies of the translations by Meredith Gardner and his colleagues have been declassified. Among these thousands of pages is this telegram involving text that dates back to February 1944.
On the 5th of February, a meeting took place between Gus and Rest. Liberal, referring to his ignorance of the problem, expresses the wish that our man should meet Caliber and interrogate him personally.
Gus, Rest, Liberal, Caliber, Arno, Charles. Code names found in the deciphered Venona papers. All of them associated with what the Soviets call the Enormous Project, aka the Manhattan Project.
If we talk about the impact of Venona, it was certainly monumental on American counterintelligence and American national security. Before that, of course, many people had denied or did not want to see that the Soviet Union was not a faithful ally, that during the war they had used that time to target the United States.
A network of Soviet spies has uncovered the United States' deepest military secret. U.S. intelligence starts a relentless hunt to flush out the men hiding behind these pseudonyms. FBI Special Agent Robert Lamphere leads the investigation. He sifts through the decoded telegrams, looking for the smallest clue.
It became clear that there was one particular source whose code names were first of all Charles and then Rest, R-E-S-T. Bob Lamphere was able to identify one particular text which indicated that Charles had traveled over Christmas 1944 to New Haven, Connecticut, and by going back to Los Alamos and checking the furlough records and to see who had been given leave over that particular period, it was possible to narrow down the number of suspects to 3 individuals. And then ultimately it was discovered that Klaus Fuchs had a sister living in New Haven, Connecticut. And on that basis, the evidence pointed to Klaus Fuchs, and he became the focus of the investigation.
Meanwhile, Klaus Fuchs has returned to England to work on the British atomic project. So the Crown's Secret Service questions him first.
The problem for the British and American investigators was to extract some kind of evidence from him that would incriminate him, but that would not compromise the source of the information, because the decryption program was still running and there was still contemporaneous traffic that was being intercepted and being read, albeit retrospectively. So the key was to extract information from Fuchs, and this was done in a very casual interrogation that was conducted by MI5 in a pub. Over a period of 3 long lunches with his interrogator, Klaus Fuchs started to compromise himself.
The spy, Klaus Fuchs, is arrested and imprisoned. During his interrogations, British and American intelligence services discover the shocking extent of his collaboration with the enemy.
In his confession to the British, and a follow-up confession to the FBI as well, Fuchs tells them that he gave the Soviet Union information on pretty much everything to do with the design of the bomb. He gave them all the dimensions, he told them how it was laid out. So we're talking about what's the size of the plutonium at the core, what surrounds that, how do the explosives work, what is the principle, what is the math. This guy gave everything he remembered, and he remembered many things.
He was an ideological man in the guise of being your sort of mild-mannered scientist, but in fact he was primarily driven by ideology. When he's nice to people at Los Alamos, he was always thinking, these are all nice people, I want to work with them and all the rest, but they really don't recognize that the future of the world lies somewhere else. And that's probably how he justified it to himself.
Klaus Fuchs articulated the view that the information that he had been entrusted with in the Second World War was of universal nature and should not just have been the monopoly of the American government.
The first link in the chain of atomic spies has broken, and thanks to Fuchs, the hunt for other members proceeds. The next suspect on the list is someone called Gus, or Arno. The Soviets refer to him as Klaus Fuchs' liaison officer. During interrogation, Fuchs formally identifies the New Yorker Harry Gold in a photo. Arrested in May of 1950, Harry Gold confesses quickly, and the dominoes fall one by one.
In order to save his neck, he compromised the other person that he had serviced as a courier, who was, of course, David Greenglass. And when David Greenglass was interviewed, in order to save his neck, he had a choice of really compromising either his wife, Ruth, or his sister, Ethel. And he identified as a Soviet spy his own sister, Ethel Rosenberg. And that, of course, drew the attention to her husband, Julius.
The Rosenberg trial at the end of 1950 became one of the most famous U.S. trials of the 20th century. The telegrams decrypted under the Venona project attest to their guilt. But at no time are the documents presented to the court.
The Venona material was never mentioned in any court proceeding during this era. The United States government did not want to reveal that it had partially broken into these Soviet codes. There's an irony here, because within a very short time after the Venona breakthroughs had been achieved, the Soviets knew we had done it, because they had a spy within the Venona project.
So the prosecution of the Rosenbergs was based really on evidence that was supplied by witnesses, including, of course, David Greenglass, and the evidence was overwhelming.
Despite the proof, the Rosenbergs refused to cooperate or confess to espionage. Faced with the couple's stubborn silence, the court decides the ultimate sentence: death.
It is the first time in peacetime that such a death penalty has been handed down. And while appeals to the highest courts are planned, it certainly appears that the spies are headed along a one-way street.
To the very day of their execution, the FBI made it clear, and the American government made it clear, that if the Rosenbergs talked, they would be spared the death penalty. But the government underestimated their fanaticism. They were willing to make their children orphans, and their children were small. They were willing to die for their cause, which they did.
By far, the Rosenbergs, who became public face of the fight against communist traitors, pay the highest price in the Soviet spy hunt. While they receive the death penalty, Klaus Fuchs is sentenced to 14 years in prison in the UK. David Greenglass is sentenced to 15 years. And Harry Gold, 30. But they only represent a fraction of the vast spy networks woven by the Soviet Union around the Manhattan Project. As the months go by, other code names appear in the decrypted telegrams: Star, Calistrat, Malad, Quantum. More looters of classified information. But who are they? How to crack their secret identities? In 1951, as the Rosenbergs are tried, the cryptologist Meredith Gardner decodes the most explicit telegram yet, sent from New York to Moscow 7 years earlier.
Beck visited Theodore Hall, 19 years old, the son of a furrier. He is a graduate of Harvard University. As a talented physicist, he was taken on for government work. According to Beck's account, Hall has an exceptionally keen mind and a broad outlook, and is politically developed. At the present time, Hall is in charge of a group at Camp 2. H handed over to Beck a report about the camp and named the personnel employed on enormous. He decided to do this on the advice of his colleague, Saville Sachs, a gymnast living in Tyre.
It's a big break for the FBI. They identify Theodore Hall, a young Harvard physicist, still working at Los Alamos, and presumably still spying. And also Saville Sachs, one of his friends. Codenames: Star and Malad.
Ted Hall is a very interesting example of a very young spy with a political commitment. And he used Saville Sachs as a courier. It is clear from the Venona traffic that he was cooperating with the NKVD and passed a lot of information to them and was highly regarded.
With Hall, it's also a case of ego. I mean, Hall is the youngest member of the Manhattan Project, and it's clear that he feels like he's pretty smart and he's getting to be with all these Nobel Prize winners and do this cool work, but he also works for the Soviet Union. If you're 19, that sounds very exciting. So he's changing the world just by talking.
After identifying the two men, the FBI faces a problem. How to approach them without divulging the existence of the Venona project.
After a long period of investigation and surveillance, both are picked up on the same day and then interrogated separately and confronted with the allegation that both of them have acted as Soviet spies. Each not realizing that the other has been arrested goes to considerable lengths to protest their innocence and not to implicate the others.
They figured out that they're unable to get a clean case against Ted Hall. And as a result, he never goes to prison. He dies a free man because they could not find a way to prosecute him without making it clear that Venona sources were involved.
Not until the declassification of the Venona Project telegrams in 1995 does anyone outside the NSA or the FBI know about Theodore Hall and his liaison officer.
The irony is that all of the secrecy provisions that scientists at Los Alamos had to endure, was it all in vain? I mean, it was certainly compromised to a great extent by the actions of these individuals.
Some experts believe that Klaus Fuchs, David Greenglass, Ted Hall, and the other atomic spies rebalanced the world powers. Others insist they tipped the planet closer to Armageddon. Either way, there is no going back.
When you judge Operation Enormous, I think that you can say that this is an extraordinary manifestation of espionage being conducted at its highest level. This provided the Soviets with an atomic weapon in August 1949, which dramatically changed history. So it's hard to exaggerate the influence, the impact of these spies.
The Manhattan Project had been referred at the end of the war as the best kept secret of the war. And then you find out that it's full of spies who were everywhere in it. So that's one of a couple things that happens about 1949, early 1950 that really makes it seem impossible to imagine a world in which the United States and the Soviet Union are going to somehow get along in some easy way, and everybody just starts making as many weapons as they can. So it's very profound.
The infiltration of the Manhattan Project and the theft of the atomic bomb plans escalated the tension between the two superpowers. Suddenly, it was not about how to win the war, but how to avoid nuclear war. In the 21st century, the scope of this amazing spy affair on both sides of the Iron Curtain is finally exposed, revealing a story that remained top secret for so long and which transformed the face of the world.